it is he's a member of the Committee on Homeland Security and on the Subcommittee on Counterterrorism and Intelligence. Walsh narrowly defeated his contender, the Democratic incumbent Bean, by a margin of only 291 votes in a Democratic district in Chicago. So, first, Congressman Walsh, a belated congratulations on your stunning victory.
Thank you. It was a close election, but it's been a very interesting time in Congress, and it's great to be with you tonight.
Thank you for joining us, Congressman.
Thank you.
I just want to say before we begin, Jacob, this was really cool. It wasn't then Congressman Walsh, but we knew he had the tenacity. We knew he was going to run. Back in the fall of 2009, he had joined us for an event for the Young Republican Professionals, for the Jewish Young Republicans, at an event in downtown Chicago. And that was quite the evening, and we said to ourselves, we know we have somebody who is on our side, and we've got to find a way to get him into Congress. And it's been awesome watching you in Congress, Congressman. So anyway, with that being said,
thank you, and good to talk to you again. I appreciate it. It has been a lot of fun, but there's important work to do.
Absolutely.
Eric, I would summarize it up. We got him.
Yeah.
First, let's turn to the burning issue of the day as we have discussed it over the past hour. The Palestinian Nakba Day protests and the clashes on the border. As somebody that's a member of the Committee on Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, what's your reaction to these protests?
I've had a busy day, but my reaction is pretty consistent and similar whenever this sort of thing erupts. We've got to be very clear and very vigilant that certain behavior just can't be tolerated. And we've got to make clear that we stand with Israel and are going to stand with Israel, and end of story. And we're not, we're just not going to tolerate disruptions and protests, especially when they turn violent. We have no interest in sitting at the table with these folks until they can renounce a lot of this stuff.
Well, talking about borders, when I made some, a review on your work, I came up, you actually proposed on illegal immigration that along the U.S.-Mexican border, in a letter to President Obama, that an alligator-filled moat should do the trick. What was your proposal by that?
You do your homework. I sent the president a letter last week because he just said something outrageous. He was down in Texas last week, and he said he was boasting about how strong he was on securing the border, which is a bunch of baloney. And he said, I just can't satisfy those Republicans. So he said, maybe it's going to take me building a moat on the border, and maybe I'll have to fill that moat with alligators. Just an insulting thing to say. So I sent him a letter, and I said, maybe a moat is a good idea, Mr. President, and I wonder how many alligators it would take to fill that moat. You're not serious about securing the border, and I think a moat filled with alligators would do a heck of a lot better job than what he's doing.
Do you think alligators can protect Israeli borders if we are to concede a part of our land and compromise to the 67 border?
Well, I'm not, again, I don't totally agree with the premise that you should concede to your land and concede to the 67 border. But yeah, I mean, alligators and then some, whatever it's going to take. Look, I've been pretty outspoken. I've been pretty outspoken these first 100 and some days. I firmly believe that at least in my modern history, we have our first president who is not pro-Israeli. And I don't know why we don't have more people of principle who aren't afraid to say that.
Absolutely.
It infuriates me. I've sponsored some things in the House. I sent Hillary Clinton a letter about 2 months ago when the administration was threatening for the first time not to veto an anti-Israeli resolution in the UN. And I sent her a letter right away, and we got co-sponsors, and we had Republicans running to us to co-sign that piece of or that letter. We had a hard time finding any Democrats.
I want to get to that resolution. It was actually number 1501 resolution to withhold U.S. contributions to the UN biennial budget until it officially retracts the Goldstone report. And you wrote in the letter, and I just want to quote, that this is another example of the United Nations' long-time bias against Israel. I found it outrageous that the United Nations has yet to distance itself from a report that even its author has discredited and disavowed. The United Nations has not been an honest broker in the Middle East, and Dr. Goldstone himself admitted that. It's high time that the United Nations stop focusing so much of its energy vilifying Israel and started dealing with the facts. So let me just ask you this. How much of support has this bill or resolution got, and how must the U.S., in your view, face all of these UN anti-Israel resolutions, not speaking those being violated by Israel's enemies as Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iran?
You know, certain things in life are pretty simple. I think we complicate things. The UN has a lot of flaws, and clearly one of their biggest is it's an anti-Israeli body. We know that. All of their history tells us that. Why we continue to provide any funding to that institution is beyond me. But here you have Goldstone himself coming out over a month ago and retracting his report, retracting the most incendiary language that report held up against Israel. The UN used that report to double, triple down on their anti-Israeli language and rhetoric, and he retracts this report, and they don't, as a body, acknowledge it and don't retract it. And it's one thing to just condemn the UN. We're so past that. My bill basically says if they don't retract at the UN, we will cease all funding. And again, we've got about 40 to 50 co-sponsors, all Republican. It amazes me that, you know, we have such a hard time finding Democrats to stand on this principle, but that's just the lay of the land in Washington right now.
Is that the case in the Congress too? Because the Senate failed to come up with resolutions against Iran, sanctions against Iran, and so. But it was that the U.S. Congress had always a bipartisan support for Israel, and you know the Iranian resolutions and. Going back years ago, the bill calling Jerusalem as the internal capital of Israel. So it looked like it's not only Republicans supporting Israel, but Democrats too. What happened since then?
Well, there certainly is Democratic support in Washington for Israel. There is a pro-Israel sentiment, but this support is different. Republicans, especially conservatives, their support for Israel is in their bones. It's in their heart. It's in their head. It's philosophic. It's religious. I can go on and on. The Democratic support that's there, it's almost just polite. It's almost perfunctory. It's almost because they're afraid not to support Israel because they're afraid of being called out. And again, I've put forth two very strong pro-Israel resolutions and letters in the last month and a half, and I've had Republicans chasing me down in the hallways to co-sponsor these things. We have to chase after Democrats to find any to sponsor. And again, this is the more important point, though, and this has got to be said. I say whenever I'm in front of an audience that I'm pro-Israel first and I'm pro-peace process second. We need to change the paradigm to that. This president, plain and simple, is not pro-Israel, and he's being protected by a media in this country that truly isn't pro-Israel either.
Talking about Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu is supposed to make a visit to Washington this week to meet with President Obama in the White House, and next week to address a joint meeting for the U.S. Congress. What do you expect to hear from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, and I'm a big fan of the Prime Minister's, and I think he's been very patient in dealing with this president, because I believe in private he questions President Obama's commitment to Israel. But he's being a stand-up guy in trying to work with this president. I would imagine in private the president is going to pressure Netanyahu to try to be as, good to the Palestinians as he can and be as open and hospitable to the peace process as he can, and cool down on those settlements. And, he expresses such concern about violence toward any of the Palestinians. He just doesn't express the same outrage toward terrorist actions against Israel. And it may get to the point where Netanyahu really has to be firm with this president, because there are some really important potential milestones coming up, like potentially the official recognition of a Palestinian state this fall, which again would certainly be used by the UN against Israel.
Yeah, inevitably.
Yeah, although the president vowed that he will veto such a bill, but we hope that we won't, reach that point that the Palestinians would go to the UN, because Israel has stretched out its hand for peace, but as you say, it was all the time rejected. Therefore, Israel has to stand firm. You don't expect Prime Minister Netanyahu to offer a new initiative in order to stand in line with President Obama?
No, and I hope he doesn't. Israel has done enough. Look, I think we need to change. I don't think we will ever have peace in that region until we change the dynamic. The United States cannot be an honest broker between two sides. We cannot be, to use a crude analogy, a referee in a football game between two sides here. We are on one side. We're on Israel's side. We are Israel's lawyer. We're their advisor. We're their confidant. We're their teammate. And we need to publicly let the rest of that region understand that, because you're dealing with one side here that refuses to acknowledge the existence of the other side, and you're dealing with one side that continues to engage in terrorist activities. That will not cease until we are firmly with Israel. That other side only respects strength. We will never get peace until we are publicly pro-Israel first.
Following the killing of Osama bin Laden, you said you're not even sure that the war in Afghanistan is helping American efforts in the broader war on global terror. What is America's goal, in your eyes, fighting the war on terror?
Well, here's the goal. And again, I do not believe this president understands what the war is. There are a large group of radical Muslims which are trying to destroy this country, our way of life, kill us, and kill Israel. It's a growing group of Islam that has hijacked a religion. That's what our war is against. And what I'm beginning to hear and what I'm beginning to question myself is Is our engagement in Afghanistan helping us or hurting us in that war? Is bombing Libya helping or hurting us in that war on terror? The same arguments could have been raised with Iraq. We can't take our eyes off of what this war on terror is, because these bad, evil people are trying to get their hands on weapons that they will use against us and against Israel. That's the war. And the moment that I think what we're doing in Afghanistan isn't helping us with that war, well then, gosh darn it, declare victory and come home. But I think it needs to be looked at.
Right. Congressman, as Jacob pointed out before, you are a member of the Committee on Homeland Security and the Subcommittee on Counterterrorism Intelligence. Monday afternoon, two South Florida imams and a relative made an initial court appearance after they'd been arrested over the weekend for their alleged material support to the Pakistani Taliban. And this guy, Hafiz Khan, 76, and his two sons and a daughter and a grandson from Pakistan are charged with 4 counts of conspiring to provide material support to these terrorists and actually providing the support themselves. We have a situation right now at this time in our country where it appears that Islamists almost have an upper hand in our court system. And thank goodness the trial of KSM did not take place in New York. It had no place in New York.
Right.
What approach should be taken to deal with these two imams from Florida at this time, based on what we know with the ISI in Pakistan and the whole takedown of UBL?
Great question, Eric. Again, this goes to your mindset, and to me, if you understand that we're at war, then these are combatants against us in this war, and
yes,
you then don't try folks like this in our criminal justice system. We're at war. You take them to Guantanamo. You take them somewhere else. You interrogate them. If you have to, you bring them between a war tribunal. But, again, we're at war. This is not a criminal proceeding. And it's very dangerous to go down that path. Look, I do sit on the Homeland Security Committee, and I'll tell you, one of the biggest threats that our country faces is the radicalization of American Muslims. And we've seen this play out a few times over the last couple of years, where some of these American Muslim citizens, will get grabbed, will get brainwashed, will get taken over into various countries, and then they'll come back here to do evil. This goes on much more than what the American people are aware of.
So why? I'm glad you bring up. Continue, Jacob. Sorry.
Just to follow up, Congressman, why does nobody bring up this issue other than Representative Peter King? I mean, this is an immediate threat to America's security, not speaking about our enemies abroad.
Here's why, Jacob, and I'll give you a perfect, vivid example. I sat on that committee when Peter King, a month or so ago, held an initial hearing to look at the problem of the radicalization of American Muslims, and Peter King had to hire a bodyguard to look after himself because he was embedded with threats. The media went after him. We live in – the reason people have a hard time speaking out about this is because we're so frightened, we're so politically correct in this country, and we keep our mouths quiet because we're so afraid of being accused of going after a religion. We're not going after a religion. But it's this silence and it's this politically correct attitude which led to what happened, say, down at Fort Hood. We saw signs. We saw signs, but we were afraid to address it. We have got to get over that.
Congressman, what is happening right now with regard to Fort Hood with Nadal Hassan? That's not been in the media. What do you know? What's being said inside the committee in Congress that you're on, what you're able to share?
I'm not able to share much. I can tell you that it's relatively quiet. There's not there's not much going on. There may be much there's some that I'm not privy to, but it's generally fairly quiet.
Let's turn to Iran, because Iran is, as seen, the main sponsor of terrorism in the Middle East region. What is being done, and what do you think should be done to stop them not only from acquiring nuclear weapons, but also from their growing influence in the region?
Well, it's clear, Jacob, that the sanctions, that teeth need to be put into the sanctions, because the sanctions aren't working. Iran is able to get around them and get supplies and materials from other countries. I think we need to step up the whole sanction route and put more consequences behind the sanctions. And this is just another example of where the president, his silence on such an important issue was deafening. Why he didn't stand up and stand with the people on the street in Iran a year or so ago when they marched and protested and many were gunned down. Why they are so quiet. The administration is so quiet with what's been going on in Syria. Our country needs to lead and be with these courageous people who are trying to stand up against repressive regimes. And then ultimately, again, it goes back to with Iran, just like with North Korea and many other bad actors, you have got to threaten, armed intervention. Ultimately, these types of people respond to strength, and if you take that off the table, you'll never ultimately get the result that you're after.
Speaking of Iraq and Iran, Dan Pipes in the Washington Times on May 12th had some very interesting comments. And the title of the article that's here is Iraq, a Province of Iran. And he writes, he said, intense Iranian efforts are underway with Tehran sponsoring militias in Iraq and sending its own forces into Iraqi border areas. Baghdad responds with weakness, with its chief of staff proposing a regional pact with Iran and top politicians ordering attacks on the Mujahideen al-Qaq, an Iranian dissident organization with 3,400 members. If the United States pulls out its troops, even if it's delayed, that area is going to further break down. We've already seen what's happened to the Iraqi Christian community there, which is under assault. Where do we go? I mean, Iran's fingerprints are on that region, and we see what they're doing in Egypt and through Syria and Lebanon, et cetera.
It's I'll tell you, Eric, it's such a great question. This is the danger in, getting involved in some of these countries to begin with. The relationships are so complicated, and Iran has been behind the scenes behaving in a dangerous and deceitful way in Iraq for a long, long time. It may get to an ultimate difficult decision of are we really in a position, because of the Iranian threat in Iraq, that we pull our troops out? I worry about that. It's a real concern. But I think we need to be much more frontal in our real direct language and attack on Iran itself. I do believe that the one unique aspect about Iran is the vast majority of that population is better educated than the population in a number of states over there, and there is a sizable contingent that is somewhat Americanized and open to freedom. We need to encourage that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you?
But you're right, Eric. Iran is the target. I mean, that's where Our focus has to be because they have their hands in every conflict in that region.
Don't you think that Israel missed an opportunity to strike in Iran after all this turmoil in the Middle East region?
I'll put it this way, Jacob. I was surprised they didn't act. Yes.
I thought May of 2008 we would have seen something or thereabout, and it did not happen, and obviously it's not happened since.
Well, I mean, I will say this, and I know it's in concert with us, but when it comes to, intelligence and preparedness to act, Israel's at the top of that list. So I know that they probably have the closest pulse of exactly where Iran is with some of these threats.
Yeah, we hope so too. Congressman, just in brief, as we have a large conservative audience, and I'm also a newcomer to the conservative principles, what's your take on raising the debt ceiling and Paul Ryan's budget plan?
Here's what I know. I know that in this country, our government is borrowing. That's borrowing $188 million every hour of every day. If we don't dramatically and quickly change that equation, our kids and our grandkids are screwed, and we can't do that to them. So when it comes to things like raising the debt ceiling, heck no. We will not raise the debt ceiling unless we get something really, really big in exchange for it, like major spending cuts and, the very first piece of legislation I introduced in Congress 3 weeks ago was a balanced budget amendment, identical to what all 47 Republican senators signed on to, which would make, the federal government do what 49 states have to do, which is balance their budget every year. We have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get reform like that, and there's no way we're going to raise the debt ceiling unless we do.
Do you think the Republicans will succeed in this fight?
Yes, because the American people get it. They're ahead of politicians on it. Politicians, thank God, don't usually lead things. And on this one, the American people get it. Look, it's why I was sent to Washington. If everybody in this country loved what this president has done these last 2 years, and they love the deficits and the debt that he's run up, you wouldn't be talking to me because I wouldn't have been elected to Congress. A great movement in this country woke up. It's called the Tea Party movement. And this movement is scared to death with how big government's getting, and they're scared to death about the debt we're placing at the backs of our kids. So I believe the Republican Party will be bold enough to rise to the challenge of that movement. And if they're not, then we're in a lot of trouble.
How about the presidential election approaching? Do you think that this will be the main topic of the election rather than everything goes together, healthcare reform and all this, but the focus on job and the economy, can it bring down President Obama?
Well, that's a great question, Jacob. The easy answer is it should. Any other president, it would. No president, I think in modern times, has been elected with an unemployment rate above 7.4%. It's now at 9%. No president should be elected with this anemic recovery we've got, with the deficits that he's got. This president is unusual in that there's something historic about him. He is our first black president. The media loves him. That's going to be difficult to beat. What I hope is that the Republicans can find a nominee who's not a rock star and not a celebrity, because I think that's all this president is. But I want to find somebody who's right on the issues, because most people in the middle of this country understand that we can't spend money like this. They disagree with him on the issues. We just need to find that candidate.
Do you see such a candidate emerging?
Yeah, my theory, Jacob and Eric, has always been this. I believe that the president is all style and no substance. He's a rock star. He's not the president. So I think for the Republicans to be successful, they need to nominate the opposite of that, somebody who's all substance and no style, but somebody who's right on the issues. I like the former governor of Minnesota, Tim Pawlenty. I think he could be an attractive candidate. The current governor of Indiana, Mitch Daniels, might run. I think we need a no-nonsense, maybe even a boring candidate who's right on the issues. And let's just be honest, we can't compete with Obama when it comes to being a celebrity. The media loves him. That'll never change. We just got to be, we need a guy or a gal who's right on the issues.
I have a final question for you, Congressman, and as we are closing for the evening, and you bring up the point of the celebrity status, and it appears that the celebrity status of the president has gone to his head because he is simply ignoring regions of the world, ignoring the plights of people. What do you know is underway at this time within the U.S. Congress to address Egypt? And I'm thinking specific to the situation of the Coptic Christian community. Back when Barack Obama was a senator, he had made comments about we have to address issues of persecution of religious minorities, and he has done absolutely nothing on that. The Coptic community in Egypt is facing a potential genocide if the wrong powers come to power in the parliamentary and presidential election that is upcoming later this year. What is happening in Congress to address the plight of the Coptic Christian community? Do you know of any measures that are in place at this time?
Eric, great question. What I know is there has been a heightened level of conversation in Congress on this topic. I am actually, when I get back next week, I hope to be sitting down with a few members to continue these discussions. I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of legislation or resolutions put forward addressing even this specific example. And you're right. His silence in some of these areas with certain populations is amazing to me. And it's amazing to me that he gets away with it. You know, the rationale for bombing Libya almost became a humanitarian rationale.
Mm-hmm.
And as you rightly point out, a number of other areas there where you can make a more compelling case on a humanitarian perspective to get involved. I just think it goes to where his allegiances are. But let's you and I stay in touch, because I hope within a few weeks there may be some action on that specific issue.
Right. I'm going to be meeting with U.S. Senator Mark Kirk on the 28th, and we'll be taking
Wonderful.
with me a delegation of the Coptic community's leadership. So once we've had that meeting, I'll be in touch with you. But, yeah, thank you for answering that question, because it's something
Eric,
we're looking at. And
thank you, Eric, and promise me you'll show me that as well, and I would love to be part of something that leads this issue in the House.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Congressman, for joining us. Thank you for taking time from your schedule. God bless you for all you're doing. We are really proud of you, and it's awesome to see a stunning win that you had here in Illinois, because it's really been a long time since we've seen such a win like that.
You got it, guys. I'd love it. I'd love to do it again. And